Jungkook pulled Ryan closer to him while sleeping peacefully. His arm wrapped tightly around her waist as other hand gently caressed the curve of her hip. The young man slowly closed his eyes and took a deep breath and snuggled his face into her chest, inhaling her scent deeply while she sleepily hugged him back. Jungkook's breathing slowed down gradually until he was completely still and asleep. Ryan woke up in the middle after hearing Jungkook's quiet breaths and soft snores. She looked at him lovingly before reaching out to play with his messy lock on his forehead. It was so easy for Ryan to get lost watching him sleep. A sweet smile appeared across Ryan's lips as she softly called him. He turned his head and looked at her, eyes still half-lidded from tiredness and sleepy expression. Jungkook answered quietly and yawned widely as he stretched. He nuzzled his nose against Ryan's stomach in satisfaction and enjoyed her warmth. Jungkook asked while rubbing his cheek on Ryan's stomach softly. He couldn't stop himself from smiling like an idiot whatever he felt this way about her. She made him feel like a kind of things no matter what they were. Jungkook hummed in agreement as he pressed his face more firmly into Ryan's stomach. He liked this feeling, this closeness. He loved being close to her and just being here with her in journal made him happier than usual. Jungkook thought as he kept his eyes shut tight, basking the moment. Jungkook decided with finality. Ryan chuckled and ran a few fingers through his messy hair. She said, making him look at her. He smirked as he started hovering himself above her. Ryan pouted as she tried pushing him off her. Jungkook laughed and held her tightly in response. He teased, giving her a playful smirk as he lowered his body and planted a small kisses against her neck. Ryan shivered underneath him and blushed as he continued kissing along her neck. She smiled and placed her free palm on his muscular back, pulling him even closer. She murmured breathlessly as he moved lower, placing a small kissing at her collarbone. She added softly, but he shook his head in disagreement as he moved to place his lip next to her ear. He whispered seductively before captured Ryan's ear lobe between his teeth and sucked lightly. Ryan moaned in approval and tightened her grip on him, her cheek flushed bright with passion. She immediately pushed him lightly before getting up. He chuckled at her shyness and looked at her tiny body going into the bathroom. Jungkook asked and winked while grinning smugly. Ryan rolled her eyes but couldn't help herself from laughing. Ryan asked, taking her seat, while Mr. Lee nodded his head before answering. She glanced at the file sitting on the desk and frowned slightly when she noticed something strange. She questioned curiously, raising an eyebrow questioningly at Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee quickly opened up the file and studied it carefully before replying. He said while checking the document in his bag. Ryan instructed calmly, but her voice sounded a bit harsh. Mr. Lee bowed his head in acknowledgement and left the room quickly. Ryan sighed heavily as she rubbed her temple in frustration. She thought looking angry at the folder. Miss Sheen asked as she entered the office without knocking. Ryan corrected her coldly while glaring at the folder lying on the center table. She explained with a hint of anger in his tone. Miss Sheen looked at the folder with narrowed eyes. Miss Sheen asked confusedly. Ryan scoffed at how stupid the woman could actually be. She asked furiously. Miss Sheen opened her mouth to reply and stopped. She seemed hesitant to say anything. Finally, she spoke up. She responded honestly. Ryan raised one eyebrow skeptically. She demanded with expression. She wasn't even surprised when Miss Shane refused to answer her questions. That woman never listened or gave good advice. It was a miracle she was promoted to the position she was currently in not because of her ability but because of her father, who was the shareholder in Ryan's company. Shin Lia has been Jungkook's and Ryan's best friend since childhood. Mr. Shin took good care of Ryan in the absence of her parent as they never cared about her. Lia and Jungkook were in a relationship in the past, and Ryan never mind as she never wanted to be the part of any relationship. Her real goals were to become a successful businesswoman and beat her parents in business, and Mr. Shane helped her in every possible way. But unfortunately, Jungkook and Lia broke up due to some personal reason, and Mr. Jin, Jungkook's father, asked Mr. Sheen to marry Ryan to Jungkook. It has been 5 years since Jungkook and Ryan married, and he really supported her. Jungkook expresses his feeling to Ryan a year ago, and they both accept each other as life partner, but it made Leah more angry and jealous. Leah's father knew the whole situation, but he chose to ignore it as he didn't want to be the part of any drama. He left the matter between two of them so they could handle it in a mature way. She growled, standing up from her chair, staring fiercely at the girl sitting in front of her. She added bitterly and watched as Miss Shane's expression hardened in anger before she stood up angrily. Before she could finish her sentence, Maya interrupted. She said sharply as her finger tapped impatiently against the surface of her desk. She glared menacingly at the girl in front of her. She nodded her head and left the office immediately while crying. Vine dropped herself on the seat and sighed. She commented with annoyance as she placed her head on her face in a deep constriction. She huffed angrily to herself. Lia smirked as soon as she entered her office. She said while looking at the old video of her and Jungkook. Why entered the mansion after a hectic day? She lost the contract with her parents' company. She did very hard work on it. And still she received nothing in return but bad news. She grumbled as she walked to her living room, falling on the couch. She rubbed her forehead but stopped her movement when her phone buzzed with the notification. She immediately opened the file which was sent by a unknown number. Her whole body froze and face turned pale. The moon on the video made her tear fall uncontrollably. She covered her burning face with her hands, trying hard not to scream loudly. Her tears soaked through her finger, causing her to sob silently. Her stomach felt nauseous and hot as she couldn't bring herself to continue watching the videos. Her hands trembled and fell limp on the armrest of the couch. She clenched her jaw tightly and closed her eyes tight as fresh tears ran down her cheek. After an hour, Jungkook entered the mansion but frowned when he saw lights were out. He got confused and went to the living room, but surprisingly the lights were turned on by YN. He looked at her confused and his heart clenched seeing her in a mess condition. The mascara stained on her face along with tear streaks through her cheeks. She looked absolutely devastated with the grief and sorrow feeling in her eyes. Jungkook quickly rushed to her side but stopped when she pointed the gun at him, making him gasp at her sudden move. She yelled angrily, pointed the gun at his chest. Her voice cracked as she tried hard to suppress her tears. She was trembling violently, tears filled in her eyes as well as her voice. Jungkook stumbled, shocked by her actions. He asked and tried to touch her but stopped once again when she chuckled. She said while shaking her head, her voice broke once again, making her cry loudly. Jungkook pelted, she asked, looking at him with her hopeless eyes. Jungkook tried reasoning with her, taking a small step closer to her, but she backed away slowly, still pointing the gun at him. She ordered harshly. He said, place the gun on his chest, making her gasp. She looked into his eyes, which were filled with love and adoration. It was something she always admired about him. She lowered her gaze and for a second before looking back at him and sighed tightly. Jago smiled softly at her reaction. He stated quickly and took another step towards her. Her soft whisper sounding so sensational and adorable to his ear. She pouted a bit and buried her face in his neck. She hugged him tightly. She mumbled softly against his skin. He sat rubbing her back. Jungkook looked at her, narrowing his eyes. Jungkook shook his head. Wang giggled, making Jungkook chuckle. He said, pulling her towards the kitchen. She followed him behind, obediently, and looked at him confused. He nodded his head and looked at her. He grinned playfully. He said seriously, looked directly into his beautiful hazel brown orbs. He gently caressed her face. He added and pulled her closer. She responded, smiling brightly, her eyes shining beautifully.